Hi, and welcome back to my channel. In this video, you have the next episode of Recent Reads, and in this particular week, I read slightly more than I read in the past 2 weeks, the recent reads before that. I definitely have been dedicating more of my time to reading this week. I did not get through every book on my TBR. There are still 2.5 days left of October, but I did talk more about that in my TBR wrap-up video that I think I have scheduled to go up before this. So back to the books. This video may actually be coming out a little later. I'm working on scheduling because I have more videos than I planned somehow. I don't know how that happened, but this might be coming out way delayed after the wrap-up portion and TBR portion, because I do want to get that out at the beginning of the month or end of the previous month. Yeah, it'll be the October 30th when that goes out. So let's get back to the books. And we start with Ariadne by Jennifer Saint. So I actually finished this on Sunday of last week. I had just started it at the time when I was filming last week's video. I went into this with medium expectations because I've read several different Greek myth retellings lately. It seems to be a trend that is popping up, and it is obviously included in a lot of, the Goodreads Choice Awards. But this one surprised me because the others, they've been middling for me. They've been fine, but they have not surpassed my expectations. They haven't been anything to write home about. This one, the way that Ariadne told the story, and she is basically the point of view character for most of the book. Her sister has some chapters as well. But the way that she tells this story, it is woven so tightly together, which really fits with Ariadne. But it's so, I don't know what word I want to use for this. There's so much pathos, so much emotion in this book, in these stories, because the lives of these women were so tragic and the things that happened to them were so rooted in injustice. And you get to the end of it and it is just so sad. It's like there's no hope, no optimism in it. But Jennifer Saint does a really good job with the actual writing, the actual prose in telling the story. And I enjoyed this one way more than I have enjoyed any other Greek retelling I've read recently. I kept up that train with book 4 in my favorite series. Now, I will say, at the beginning of this, some events start and I got so lost because I'm like, I just read the 3rd book in this series and I'm so confused. I don't remember that event happening. A little ways into it, after things started rolling, I remembered the way that Jen Lyons typically tells these stories, and she will typically start the story out at an event that's in the future for most of the narrative of the book. But there's like multiple timelines. There's the present / future timeline where it started, that keeps going little by little, and then all those threads come together towards the end and it moves forward from there. I had forgotten about that when I started it. And as soon as this first, we'll call it a flashback chapter, happens, I went, oh, I wasn't already supposed to know about this deal with this mythological creature, because we hadn't gotten there yet at the end of the last book. This book digs even deeper into the psyche behind so many of the characters. They have basically all come back together in this book. The only character that doesn't really play a huge part in this physically is Rillis Var, who is basically kind of like one of the big bad guys, but it's complicated. In here, he's mentioned throughout the entire book, and he makes brief appearances here and there. But everyone else is present and makes such an impact, and you get to explore the reasons, the motivations behind what drives them, and emotions and complications of what's the good thing, what's the bad thing, what happens when everything is in chaos. and it's just so well done. This is a 4.5, not a 5, because as much as the relationship between Kieran and his love interest is fascinating, there's not as much push and pull at this point in the story. And a lot of that exploration, in my mind, weighed the story down a little bit because of how much was focused on it. I don't think as much should have been focused on it, but that brought it down just a teeny bit, just a teeny bit. This still is an amazing series, and I am so sad that next month I'm going to be reading the finale of the series. Then we come to one that was a bit of a disappointment, and that is A Million to One. Last month I read another book, an SCASL book set on the Titanic, and I thought that that author did an excellent job setting this story on the Titanic while also staying true to the historicity of the events. In staying true to that, made it even more poignant. This author did not. In her author note at the end, she mentions a few things that she twists and changes and takes some artistic liberties with in the historical events. I understand why she did that. I understand what she wrote and explained in there. I just think that if you had to twist those events like that, events that everybody knows, maybe don't try to tell this sort of a story set in that event if you have to change it so much. Also, these characters just read incredibly flat throughout, and some of these scenarios just were not believable at all for the time period. There's a sapphic relationship in here, and at one point when they're basically out in the open where everyone's around, two of the girls kiss. And nothing is said about it, and they're just like okay with it. And I just am going, no, historically, that would not have happened. At least it would not have happened without severe consequences at that time. And there were just several things that stretched the suspension of disbelief way too far, on top of flat characters and a really unrealistic, unbelievable sort of, they call it Ocean's 8 type heist. It was fine, but there was just so many things that I'm just like, yeah, this is kind of lame. So this is probably going to get on hold. Not probably, this is going to get on hold. Then we come to a book that was the series that I started for this month, where I had expectations of, like, people really, really love this story. I knew exactly what it was going in. It's grittier, it's more contemporary fantasy, urban fantasy is the word I want. And I didn't know whether or not that would be for me, but I was willing to go into it because people talked a lot about the character exploration in here and how deeply involved you get in the family. And that is Jade City by Fonda Lee. And as I read it, I went through different waves. I was hooked in the beginning, then there were some things that happened where I'm like, this is fine, I'll probably read it and not necessarily continue in the series. And then something would happen with one of the characters and I'd be sucked in again. And then I went down a little bit, and then by the time it ended, the way that Fonda Lee talks about family in this story and explores those relationships, I have not seen that done that way in any other book that I've read. Mob, mafia type stories are not my favorite, so this is never going to be my favorite series, but I am going to definitely continue with the other two books in this trilogy. It was a fascinating ride throughout this book. It read fast, but at the same time, I took my time going through this, understanding the plot is not fast-paced. It's not an action-packed plot, even though there's all kinds of things that happen in here. When one event happened with a character who I thought made it longer than that character did, I actually looked up online to see if, because of the way that the character death happened, you didn't necessarily think it was death. And then you were told because other characters were told about the death of this character. I'm like, is that character actually dead? What is going on here? And then I saw something on the Wikipedia that hasn't been revealed in here, and I'm really wondering when that's going to come about, when that's going to be revealed. That will probably come in later books. But this is just a fascinating book, and it is a study in sometimes you do have to keep going and not discount a book just because at a certain point you're not really enjoying it. So this is a 4-star for me. Not a overwhelming new favorite, but definitely something well worth the read. Then we come to 2 books in a series that I read in a day. Yes, they are graphic novels. And yes, I did indeed read them to get more caught up on my page count goals. And those are Lore Olympus Volume 4 and Lore Olympus Volume 5. You haven't seen the video yet. It's going up way after this, but I did go to an independent bookstore, my favorite independent bookstore, got a lot of them, including these, and I've read them before this video goes up. I will consider that a win. Now, these are fairly heavy, so I'm just going to hold up one of them. I continue to really enjoy this story. The artwork is phenomenal. The way that Rachel Smythe has drawn these, Smythe or Smith, I don't know which one it is, but the way that she has drawn these, it's just so well done. Her use of color is so purposeful, and I really enjoy her style as well. And the stories that she's telling, the fact that we're now at 5 books and it's only basically like 2-3 weeks that have passed, it's fascinating. I would have thought that a lot more time has passed. I love that it's even more than the Hades and Persephone storyline, and that you're getting all of these other gods brought into it and how they interact. Yes, Hades and Persephone are the main characters. This series has made me become a Hades stan when in the past haven't really been. Is he a perfect guy? No, he's a great god. But I just really, really like the way that Rachel Smythe is telling these stories, and I will continue to purchase these books as long as they are published. They're not cheap, but I love these stories, and I love that this is the way that I got to end the physical reading for this particular week and basically the month. I do have 2 books ongoing. One I'm going to talk about in just a second. I'm about half an hour away from finishing the audiobook. The other one I will probably finish later today, but I will probably not talk about as much. I think I'm going to skip a week of recent reads. I'm not sure, because I'm going to be restructuring how I do recent reads at the end of the year because of my Goodreads project. And that book doesn't fall into the Goodreads project. And that book that I'm halfway through is Caraval. I'm literally 50% through. I can see snippets of Stephanie Garber's writing and the things that I love in the Once Upon a Broken Heart series. I'm really anticipating getting the 3rd book in that series because I love that series. Hopefully it comes soon enough because it will probably be on the Goodreads Choice Award list for young adult sci-fi fantasy. But I haven't necessarily connected to Caraval in quite the same way. I'm still intrigued. I'm still reading along and enjoying the text. I have to say that part of it is, while I was attempting to read at a certain point, I was legitimately really tired. And I think my eyes might have scanned through because I got to a point, I'm like, how did we get here? I don't know. So I think I was like partially awake and flipping pages, but not comprehending. Who knows? But it's only a handful, and I've put together some of those pieces. I will leave further thoughts about that for next week. I will probably mention it at least briefly. I may not. I may run out of time for that. The last book, the one that I am going to talk about as basically having finished it, is one of my nonfictions for the month. The Know-It-All, One Man's Humble Quest to Become the Smartest Person in the World. Obviously, he is being sarcastic in this title, and that tone is basically a very similar tone to what he has throughout the book. Now, this is an older book, so there are a lot of pop culture references in this memoir type book that are a bit outdated. Obviously, this was published in 2005. That's almost 20 years ago now. Yeah, making myself feel old. But anyway, in this, the author, A.J. Jacobs, made it a quest for himself to read through the entire Encyclopedia Britannica and try to retain as much of this information as he could. And throughout it, he's also including personal anecdotes, the chief of which that he's chronicled throughout the book is he and his wife struggle with infertility and then successful pregnancy and eventual birth of their first son. And I do know that it was successful because I did look it up online. Part of this, like when I first started reading, I was really engaged with it and I thought it was funny and parts of it were funny. But after a while, that repeated sort of snarky sarcasm, it wears on you and it's not as funny anymore. And he does indulge in some scatological humor and some, not like other sorts of references that aren't necessarily pleasant. They're not bad. They're not horrible. He's not coming out and saying certain things, but he's making those references that make him seem like a 13-year-old, 14-year-old boy. It's just fine. And after a while, the addition of all these facts that he's reading and putting in, and this is organized A to Z, as the Encyclopedia Britannica is, it gets a little bit mind-numbing towards the end, and I'm just sort of listening to the end to get through it. So is this going to be a book that I keep? No. It's an interesting premise, but I think he relies on a few different things too much to make it the kind of book that I would really enjoy and keep in my collection. So there you go. There are the basically 7 books that I read last week. Definitely picking up the pace with reading. And you would have seen in my TBR video the size of some of the books that I have to read. I definitely need to pick up the pace. Thanks so much for watching. I hope to see you in the next one.